You, Chad, and thank you to Valley Grassroots for Democracy and to all of you for getting up and being here, and the coffee isn't even on yet. And I have to thank Barbara Cummings and Martha Sullivan for driving me around and getting me to these events on time and to the right towns. I'm thrilled that the chair of Progressive Democrats of America, which is another great organization, Mimi Kennedy, is here. Wave your hand, Mimi. Television star, but we won't mention that. I want to talk and then have questions and answers and discussion before we have to run to the next city, but I want to ask you all questions as we go along as well. Who can tell me what Article 1 of the United States Constitution is about? Yeah, shout it out. Congress, yes. The first 60% of our Constitution is about this bunch of people that we think of as courtiers and court jesters who just get in the way and stall things up and interfere with our president's power to run the country. And yet every power in the Constitution is given to Congress. And then you have this weak executive to execute the will of Congress. And we flip that upside down, including the power to make laws. It's quite rare now for Congress to make a law. At best, you have the president tell Congress, write the law for them or tell them how to write the law and instruct them all along through the process how to bring that into law. And this is the case now, of course, with the president and Congress being in the same party, but this was the case when Bush was president. And I know some of you have Congressman Sherman as your congressman, and I applauded that outburst of honesty where he mentioned a year and a half ago on the bailout bill that they were threatening martial law if people wouldn't vote for that thing. You know, and I had a long exchange with his office when they were trying to retract that without actually retracting it and so forth. But presidents have a lot of power over Congress, regardless of party. When Congress doesn't do what the president wants, presidents now tend quite often to just make laws, broad public policies, with executive orders, without pretending to involve Congress. President Bush, President Obama. When Congress passes a bill and they didn't get it quite right, presidents now accepted practice and write a signing statement changing parts of the law. The use of signing statements that Bush made was quite innovative, and he used them very frequently, and he changed many, many parts of laws, and the departments of the government were instructed to obey the signing statement, not the law, and did so. And candidate Obama campaigned very eloquently against this blatantly unconstitutional practice, and then engaged in it for the first 5 months. Not as frequently as Bush did, but quite dramatically, and then stopped. He stopped in June, and people sort of wondered why. And part of it was no doubt that Congress was finally pushing back in a bipartisan way, because now the Republicans would denounce it because the president was a Democrat, and the public was pushing back. But would a president really give up a power like that easily? It was hard for me to fathom. And the analysis that Charlie Savage wrote in the New York Times last weekend is actually maybe more disturbing than the signing statements. That is, the White House now has an official policy that if a law is passed that's already been dealt with by a previous signing statement, by Obama or by Bush, then you can simply silently assume that that part of that law is no good. Let Congress go on believing that they made a law, but just don't comply with it. And if there's a section of law that has not been dealt with by any signing statement or executive order or executive decree, then go to the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department and say, write me a memo saying that this part of the law is not law. And they do that. And this is the office that for George W. Bush produced memos purporting to legalize torture and to legalize things worse than torture. And we know that President Obama does this as well because it's been done publicly. We don't know how many secret memos have been produced by the Justice Department in the past 12 months. We know that there were all these secret memos for Bush's White House that are no longer secret. Beyond that, presidents can now make treaties without Congress, like the treaty with Iraq. They can make appointments without Congress. They can spend money without Congress that was appropriated for something else. They can spend money in secret. They can operate in secret. And they can simply go around the law and then not use the pardon power, but use the power of retroactive immunity, where you just give masses of people or corporations free rein to violate laws without even telling us who they are or what the crimes were. So we have this incredible shift that happened. It wasn't brand new, but accelerated dramatically when Bush and Cheney were there. That's now being cemented in place and expanded upon. The power to spend money was supposed to be entirely in the Congress. Now we have a bill with over 300 co-sponsors in the House just to let the Congress see what the Federal Reserve does with our money. God forbid, control it as the Constitution demands. And we can't get a vote. You only need 218 to pass it. We got over 300, you can't get a vote on it. And I think most significantly, the power to make war has been firmly fixed in the hands of a single individual and every future single individual who sits in the White House, to the point where the president accepts a Nobel Peace Prize and advertises the glories of war and claims the right to launch wars at his own discretion, and nobody blinks. Now, if that had been President McCain making that speech, it would have been a national scandal and embarrassment, but nobody blinks. John Yoo, how many people know who John Yoo is? Y-O-O. Most of you. This is one of the guys who wrote the memos legalizing torture. Who remembers what he and his buddies legalized that might even be worse than torture? Any guesses? Waterboarding certainly is torture. Wiretapping without a warrant certainly is a crime. Yes, sir.
Didn't he say that basically the president could decide in times for national security or times of war, what can be done with prisoners and to basically ignore Congress? Wasn't there something to that?
Yes, his theory, and it's in his new book, and he's on all the talk shows, and there's a nice article in the San Francisco Chronicle today, is that in a time of war, which a president can simply declare it to be, even a vague time of war against an emotion or a tactic, just a time of war, the president has absolute power. But what I'm concerned about is the secret memos that they wrote purporting to legalize specific crimes. And I think far and away the most egregious were the memos legalizing aggressive war at the whim of a president, regardless of international law, regardless of domestic law, regardless of constitutional constraints on a branch of the government. Any future president can launch an aggressive war. That's a president's power. This is down in black and white. This is the supreme crime of mass murder. And all you hear about is the torture, and I'm not supporting torture, but I think that torture is a footnote to this. John Yoos, the last chapter of John Yoos' book is quite excited about President Obama's willingness to use all of these powers that Bush and Cheney put in place. He's been talking this week especially about how wonderful the use of unmanned drones is. And I don't mean wonderful in their precision targeting. I mean wonderful in the extent of the blatant illegality of it. This is what pleases somebody like John Yoo. Incidentally, there's a lot of people protesting today at CIA headquarters in Virginia over this use of drones, and then taking a march a couple hundred yards to Dick Cheney's new house to have some words with him and see if they can slap some handcuffs on the guy. But thank you. The San Francisco Chronicle article today about John Yoo and about his enthusiasm for these powers and their continuation has a very interesting remark, I think, about torture. Because torture, as you may know, was illegal before Bush and Cheney ever came to town. It's a felony. Every act of complicity in torture, the authoring of these memos, is a felony under U.S. Code. And yet, we had this whole debate while Bush and Cheney were there about whether we should ban torture. And we would ban torture, and Bush would undo it with a signing statement, and they would ban torture again, and so forth. It did all of this nonsense for years. So that when President Obama shows up, nobody really understands that torture was actually illegal to begin with. And so the new president announces an executive order banning torture yet again. And the danger in that is that if a president can ban torture, a president can unban torture. And so the new guy at the CIA, Leon Panetta, has made very clear repeatedly that the president maintains the power to torture if he wants to. He's just choosing not to at the moment. David Axelrod has made the same point. And so in the San Francisco Chronicle today, I read, quote, "It seems unlikely that Obama will sanction torture." Well, it ought to seem illegal. It ought not to seem unlikely. We ought not to be just hoping. Raise your hand if you know who Jay Bybee is. Pretty good room, pretty good percentage for events I've been to. Jay Bybee was John Nuys' boss for most of the time. They were there writing these memos, and Jay Bybee was doing it because he wanted to be a judge, and they made him a judge. And he has a lifetime seat in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, sitting in Pasadena and San Francisco and Portland and Seattle, overturning the rulings of decent judges. And his signature is at the bottom of blatant confessions to the worst crimes there are. And they won't impeach him because Fox News wouldn't like it. You know, does John Conyers run the Judiciary Committee, or does Fox News run the Judiciary Committee? The answer will not be pleasant. But this is they impeached a judge this year, didn't traumatize the nation. They impeached a judge for groping people. But he was not a right-winger. You know, if it's a Democrat, if there's sex, you can impeach people. If it's not a Democrat, if there's no sex, if it's someone from the executive branch or formerly thereof, well then, you know, that would be traumatic. And so this guy sits there as a judge in a courtroom in Pasadena. I would be offended if I lived anywhere near here. And in fact, a lot of good people go and protest at 125 South Grand Avenue in Pasadena, hint, hint, and the next time they are sitting in court there is February the 1st for a number of days, and some date between now and then on their on the Ninth Circuit's website, they will post which judges will be sitting there. And sometimes Bybee will be included and sometimes not. But he should not get a moment's peace. So check that website. There also are towns around the country now passing resolutions. Say, if Bush or Cheney set foot in this town, they shall be arrested. And the same thing with their subordinates and these torture judges and these illegal war judges. Wouldn't it be nice if some towns around this general area passed some resolutions saying that if Jay Bybee set foot here, he shall be arrested? And you could put up banners and say, Judge Bybee, you cannot come up this freeway. It's perfectly doable. This is something people are doing around the country. And passing local and state resolutions is a very useful thing. The California Democratic Party passing a resolution against the war in Afghanistan. It's a wonderful thing that builds pressure, which they did, if anybody missed that. To get at Jay Bybee, I think one approach would be how we got rid of Alberto Gonzales. You know, we forget all the victories along the way, you know, and they get buried by other things. And Gonzales was replaced by another guy just as bad. But we got rid of him. And do you remember how we did that? Do you remember why Alberto Gonzales had to quit and leave? Because what? Well, we forced Congress to do something.
He had a bad memory.
He did a very bad memory. Well, there were hearings in the Senate and hearings in the House. And Mr. Gonzalez was happy to go in and embarrass the hell out of himself. And I do not recall, sir. I do not recall, sir. I do not recall, sir. They have no shame. He was happy to do that and continue as Attorney General. That's not what forced him out. What forced him out was that one congressman put in a one-sentence bill that said the House Judiciary Committee shall consider whether Alberto Gonzalez has committed impeachable offenses. And they were getting co-sponsors and co-sponsors by the dozens. And they had 30 to start with. And then in summer of 2007, so many congressmen were going to sign on to that when they came back in the fall, that he quit and left. He quit and left because of the same reason that he sneezed or tied his shoes, because George W. Bush told him to. And George W. Bush told him to because when you have an impeachment hearing on a subordinate for crimes authorized by the president, and it's an impeachment hearing, not an ordinary hearing, there's one thing you can't say when they demand photos, videos, documents, reports, testimony. You can't say no. Do you remember what Richard Nixon was just about to be impeached for when he jumped on a helicopter and left? Do you remember what it was? What the specific charges were? Obstruction? Yes, refusal to comply with an impeachment hearing. Right? So a president doesn't want that. Right? If we had a brave Congress member or a Congress member with some very persistent constituents put in a one-sentence bill with Jay Bybee name in there instead of Alberto Gonzalez, and we started getting co-sponsors on that, that's a threat. That's not just talk. It's a threat to the Justice Department. They start enforcing justice. Impeachment efforts usually succeed without having to actually do an impeachment. It's the threat of actual action from that branch of government. We are going to take lots of questions and answers at the end. So if it's something life or death, or I got somebody's name wrong, so that's an angle to pursue. But if you recall, in 2006, the Congress said, we aren't going to impeach anybody, no matter what you do. You can barbecue infants on the White House lawn, nobody's getting impeached, which was a wonderful demonstration of the power of impeachment because Bush and Cheney escalated their crimes and abuses with greater arrogance. But do you remember what they did as a pretense of oversight instead of impeachment for two long years, in 07 and 08? What did they send dozens of to the executive branch? Well, those are thousands of those. I'm talking about something that if they bring it to your door and you say, go Cheney yourself, a subpoena, dozens of them. Dick Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, oh, I got to go shoe shopping that day, go ahead without me. Oh, I've got a golfing schedule. How many of those dozens of top officials who told Congress to go to hell have been re-subpoenaed in the past 12 months? Not a single one. They played games with us. They played games. Who knows what inherent contempt is, other than that feeling in your stomach when Cheney comes on the screen again? Who knows what inherent contempt is? Yes, sir, in the front row.
It's just not showing up, showing your contempt of Congress by not appearing.
Well, yes, if you refuse to comply with a subpoena, then you can be held in contempt of Congress. But the idea of inherent contempt is that Congress has the inherent power, in fact, any committee, not even a full House, any committee has the inherent power to preserve its future existence by literally holding that person in contempt in a jail cell on Capitol Hill until they testify to the satisfaction of the committee. Not even I do not recall, sirs, but to the satisfaction of the committee, which was used many, many times for the better part of U.S. history and hasn't been used in 75 years because they made a statute so the Justice Department would enforce contempt. And that worked okay till they started subpoenaing people who worked at the Justice Department. And then what did they do? Did they say, oh, well, we'll go back to the old practice. We'll use the Capitol Police. Many of us are intimately familiar with the Capitol Police. You speak too loudly, you get to know these guys. Well, they've got jail cells, honeycomb in Capitol Hill. We'll go back to that. No. Instead, they said, we'll take them to court. There's a real branch of government. We won't pretend to have any powers. We'll take them to court. And eventually they get a ruling. But again, not a single person forced to come in. Back in April, when these torture memos came out, and Jay Bivey's name is at the bottom, your judge, Jay Bivey, Senator Leahy, chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, said, Mr. Bivey, would you mind coming in and having a talk with us? The United States Senate, it's down the road from the White House, it's a big white thing, you might have heard of it. And Jay Bivey said, no, go to hell. And Senator Leahy said, oh, I'm sorry, I troubled you, sir. And that was that. That was that. What? Because the new Justice Department won't enforce it either, because the president runs the Justice Department and has made it his crusade to protect these criminals, and because the committees won't do anything that the president doesn't order them to do either. You have the majority of Congress taking their orders from the guy who's supposed to execute the will of Congress, because we don't have 3 branches anymore, we have 2 parties. So we have to step it up ourselves to make these things happen. The other thing that I think Congress could do on our behalf that would be a threat to other branches and take some power back would be to use a power called the purse to stop funding these wars with our money, which we need for useful things. That would be a way to take back power. Another thing that I think Congress could do to have more power, especially on behalf of people like you, would be to have a progressive caucus.